Hello and welcome to part 3 of my playthrough of The New Order: The Last Days of Europe. Specifically, the storyline of the OAA. Last we left off, we had begun working on missile tests in Antarctica, and we had also sent the CIA is using Antarctica's security network, basically to stage black operations across, various third world countries and such. We had tried to liberate Malaysia from Japanese occupiers. Our agents were killed. However, we did help make quite a bit of progress for our side, and it's possible that a combination of the US military and the natives will be able to kick out the occupiers. So, what else? I guess I'm going to start by checking to see how many field operatives we have, or task forces. We have 6 of those out, so that's okay. We're a little low on militarization. We have decent legitimacy and lots of supplies. Alright, starting on the timer, let's see what's going on here. Alright, so let's see. So Che Guevara, actually not sure how to pronounce that name. I've read it a lot, but he was released from prison. Meanwhile, the Republic of Turkey has declared war on Il Governmentarazo de Levant. Ever since the Second World War ended, Turkey has never been pleased with their share of the spoils. Far too many Turks ended up outside of their borders. These long, simmering tensions have exploded today as Turkish President İsmet Inönü, I don't know how to pronounce that word, Inönü, has announced that a state of war now exists between the Turkish Republic and the Italian Empire. Despite being former allies, the war has already proven extremely popular in Turkey. Young nationalists march through the streets of Ankara, yelling on Inanu to lead us to victory. Comparatively, in Italy, the public has shown little to no support for the war, with many questioning why Italy is even in Cyprus in the first place. What a way to treat a former ally. Alright, well, that's not relevant to our story right now. I am going to hit this Work with Beale button. There's also a war between Regno d'Italia and the Republic of Yugoslavia going on. That's also not relevant to our story right now. Or maybe it is relevant to our story. So, trouble in the Levant. So the fax is coming in now, and it's the most up-to-date. Does it say anything about the Golan Heights? The man on the other end was evidently fed with Simon's questions and hung up. Paskowicz sat down, rubbed his temples, and sighed. "What's the matter, Simon?" Takia inquired, standing over the telephone fax, awaiting the incoming papers. "I've got cousins in the Levant. Been trying to get a hold of them all morning. One of them went and joined the Haganah. They're, how do I say this, a Jewish militia." "Ah, so terrorists," Takia jested. "Well, that's one way to put it. Is the fax printed yet?" Simon tersely replied. "Oh, come on, Simon, I'm just fucking with you, mate. Yes, the fax is printed." He stapled the papers together and shoved them into Simon's hands. "I didn't see anything about the Golan. I checked." "All right, well, let's get this bulletin on the air, Takia," Simon sighed. Not before I get another cup of coffee, though. Takia, with 2 cups in hand, set them down on the table. I read your goddamn mind, Simon. Have you ever been to the Levant? Simon graciously grabbed the mug, gracefully clinking with Takia before taking a sip. Only once, and it was a few years back. The paperwork is a hassle. I don't think we're ever going back there. But if we do, I'm staying in Tel Aviv. Why my dumbass cousins left to live on that kibbutz is beyond me. Simon read the confused look on Takia's face. Oh, a kibbutz is a commune. We spent 3 weeks of our vacation doing manual labor in August. Takia grimaced. Sounds dreadful. But family is family. Simon nodded. Damn right. Here's to Yoav, wherever the hell you are. Takia slurped his coffee and chimed. To Yoav, wherever the hell you are. And more wars are breaking out throughout the world. 2 remnants of the Soviet Union are declaring war on each other. Actually, no, wait. 1 remnant of the Soviet Union has conquered another remnant of the Soviet Union. To the madness of daring, we chant a song. So, as I mentioned, the Soviet Union has broken up, and as a result, there are various warlord states that are vying for power. Eventually, one might rise to the top, but it won't be in our storyline. If people like this playthrough enough, I might do another playthrough through, like, the United States storyline, and then it would become more relevant. Or I could even play as one of the Russian warlords. We'll see. I'm going to speed up the time a bit here. Darkening days. It was the wind that first signaled the arrival of winter. It slipped through any protection and whipped at her bones, leaving a hollow pit where once her body had resided. Perhaps that was an extreme way to think of it, but she certainly felt that it was true. The following week saw McMurdo completely change. The daily routine of most personnel shifted as the days grew shorter and shorter, while special systems were installed to help navigate the snow-strewn and ice-laden roads. A few innovative groups had even started pulling straws to decide who had to brave the storm outside and who got to reside in relative comfort. Lois was conspicuously left out of these cliques. In fact, she was left out of most things. The men around base didn't have much interest in including the stocky and unwomanly scientists in their arrangements, and those who did usually had ulterior motives. She was quick to shut down any conversations that went in that direction. So, isolated and stuck indoors at the onset of a winter she could never have dreamed of, Lois buried herself in her research. One thing she couldn't fault the continent for was a lack of specimens to examine. Rocks abounded in less snowy months, and she had collected enough samples to last her till Christmas. One set of nearby valleys, the aptly named McMurdo Dry Valleys, had piqued her interest, and she had found herself presently surrounded by neatly sorted stones with mysteries just waiting to be unraveled. A rap at the door interrupted her thoughts, and in came her assistant, Mark Nelson. He was one of the few people she truly felt comfortable around, along with Hillary and some other scientists, and though he was too dry and career-driven to cultivate a real friendship with, she welcomed his heavy clomping boots and fresh reams of paper. Just set that down there, would you? I'm spending a lot of legitimacy to do things that'll boost cohesion. I guess in story terms, I'm working with, the various countries, but legitimacy back home. They, I'm working with other countries and making them happy, but making my own country not all that happy. Anyways, the thief territory of Yugra, a warlord state in Russia, declared war on the Vorkuta Corrective Labor Camp, another warlord state in Russia. Basically, I guess some criminals and some prison went to war with each other. Need to know. The trouble with telling different lies to different groups of people was that it became damn near impossible to remember the original story. That was the problem Rear Vice Admiral Rayborn now struggled with on Project Iceman. Recently, he'd received word from the Army's attaché for the project that the parameters for the launch vehicle needed to be updated for its launch site, a launch site Rayborn still didn't know. Rayborn had previously surmised that it had to be somewhere in the Arctic, with his money being on Alaska, but the design teams didn't even know that much, and he had trouble figuring out how to disseminate this new information to them without giving it away. In his discussion with the electronics team, he had to gently nudge away from the issue of system cooling. When he spoke to the airframe team, he had to suggest that the rocket would need to be rigged to survive a much wider range of external temperatures than others of its kind. And of course, the really fun one, figuring out how to tell the re-entry vehicle team that they had to store warheads in a polar climate without telling the re-entry vehicle team that they had to store warheads in a polar climate. Rayborn made a mental note that if he ever met the dick who came up with this concept of extreme secrecy, he'd be sure to thank and slap him, not necessarily in that order. Rayborn knew he had some of the best scientists and engineers available working on this project, blown into McMurdo from across America. However, even they'd be negatively affected by the need-to-know policy in place. Now, what was I supposed to tell the guys working on the engines? Pull open the Antarctica map. Oops. Looks like we can send out some more task forces. Going to do more raids into enemy territory to get legitimacy. I'm going to increase patrol rates. I'm going to survey my territory so that we get more legitimacy that way. And the Nazis are doing something spooky in my territory, and I don't like that, so I'm going to intercept that. There we go. I'm going to see if I can check on how Malaysia's doing. Or I could wait. CIA in the cafeteria. I wouldn't be surprised if the chefs sprinkle in opium to keep us coming back for more, Simon remarked, digging into his third plate of spaghetti. Takia and Matthew sat across from him. They would have agreed if they weren't busy scarfing down forkfuls of food themselves. Instead, the three silently ate while the cafeteria buzzed around them. It was after the three finished their meals that Simon got a tap on the shoulder. It was one of the CIA spooks. Simon Paskowitz? Simon nodded. That's me. Who the hell are you? The agent's response was a terse, follow me, please. Simon bid adieu to his friends and followed the agent through the corridors of McMurdo to a place he had never known existed. He wanted to say something amusing, but decided against it, instead hoping the silent trek would terminate soon. Eventually, the agent calmly ordered Simon into a discreet room in a quiet corner of the station. Stepping inside, the room was cozy, hazy cigarette smoke bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. There were two loungers in the room, and the man inside gestured him forward. I managed to snag some donuts from the cafeteria. Help yourself. Simon accepted a glazed donut and swiftly finished it. You're probably wondering why you're here. It's because you received a letter from your cousin that is of great interest to us. I'm not sure if you've been keeping track of the conflict in the Levant, but your cousin Yoav has joined the Haganah. The man gave Simon the letter, and he tucked it into his coat pocket. The reason we brought you here is to tell you we aren't going to intercept any more letters. From now on, if you hear anything else from your cousin, just call us on this number. Any questions? Simon confidently inquired, May I take the donuts with me, sir? The CIA spook nodded. Knock yourself out. Ugh, the Japanese seem to be retaking some of their territory in the Malaysia. Oh, our guys just got it. Just got that territory back, so come on, go America. Alright, the Grey Room. A drab, grayish room on the outskirts of Atlanta. A recruitment office. That's where Edward found himself, staring listlessly at an open window. He heard shuffling of papers and an occasional sigh. The light from outside was cut by the road. He heard shuffling of papers and an occasional sigh. The light from outside was cut by the broad shroud of trees so that the only few glimmers reached inside the room. The rest of the world might as well not exist past those leaves. Private Freeman, are you sure this would be the right job for you? The recruitment officer set the papers on his desk and looked at him with what Edward thought was an odd form of concern. Yes, sir, he responded plainly. Maybe not with enough enthusiasm. He had trouble with that, but not for lack of trying. It turned out that this Greenland gig had a few more positives to it, other than escaping his commander. First and foremost, some extra pay. His face had lit up when he found out. Ma was having enough trouble with bills. She could use the help. Helping Ma was the reason he'd gone into this whole army circus in the first place, wasn't it? I don't know, the recruiter clicked his tongue. It's cold up there. Colder than anything here. Are you sure someone of your, origin could handle it? Edward did not answer. He might have a few years now, but not now. He kept imagining the fat roll of cash he'd send to Ma after the job was done. After a moment, he shrugged his shoulders. Well, I just figured, sir. Haven't seen many white boys signing up to go here. You won't see my skin under the gloves and the jackets, will you? The officer was silent. Edward was too. Both knew the Greenland job was short on men. Finally, the recruiter broke first and sighed. He accepted another volunteer. Our cohesion is pretty decent. Oh, I can send out more task forces now, so I'm going to do that. Pull open my handy-dandy Antarctica map. And let's see what I'm low on. Still a bit low on legitimacy, so I'm going to just survey territory. There. Ah. The Japanese are gaining some ground again. I guess it's just, a bit of a tennis match with territory here. They gain some, and then our side gains some. But okay, the war between Italy and Yugoslavia is over. Italy won. This is the graveyard of the living. This is horrible because it is the worst to live and already be dead. I'm going to pull open PERT, and I'm going to actually allocate additional supplies, requisition some additional manpower, and maybe... I don't think I'm going to increase... Well, actually, yes, I will. Okay. Alright, so hopefully PERT will go well. What would be even better is if Malaysia was liberated. Wouldn't that be great? Alright, atomic sandwiches. The re-entry vehicle team was in charge of designing the vehicles that carried nuclear warheads up into space and back through the atmosphere to their targets. Considering the delicacy of nuclear warheads, it was important not to fuck anything up, which was exactly what engineer Ellis Davidson was afraid of doing at this very moment. His assistant Royce, chewing on a sandwich, looked over Davidson's shoulder at the schematic of the REV. "You're holding that upside down," Davidson sighed. "Yes, thank you for that astute observation." "It's what I'm here for." Royce took another bite. "Food's not half bad here." "Yeah, funny how the place gets better sandwiches than the Pentagon." "Well, actually, I guess it does kind of make sense, considering we're at the ass end of the planet." Davidson glanced at Royce. "You sitting in okay?" "I don't think I'll ever get used to the cold, but my quarters are comfortable enough. Although I wish they'd tell us a bit more about what we're actually working on." Davidson shrugged. "It's got to be something big if we're not allowed to even talk to the other design teams." Well, as long as whatever this is pointed at the Nazis or the Japs, I'm happy." "Alright," said Davidson. "Let's start crunching some numbers and see how these things hold up under extreme cold." Alright, more options for Taito and the Partisans have been defeated. Alright, anyways, more options here. Let's see what I can look at. Ooh. Alright. Invisible troubles. A frown. That's all that Wallman could evoke as he examined the fissure on the containment vessel of the reactor. He had been awakened by a frantic call from one of his colleagues, who first noticed the issue. He was still a bit grumpy about being woken up, but the news had immediately been alarming to Wallman. So what do you think, Kenneth? Jeremy asked, standing back and letting the senior engineer make his assessment. Wallman pursed his lip for a moment. Well, it's not just one fissure. I can see at least two more. He saw Jeremy's mouth drop open in shock, and maybe embarrassment for not having noticed them. But Wallman couldn't blame him. The hairline cracks were minuscule. If one didn't see it, they'd think the reactor was chugging along just fine. Their size didn't prevent them from causing harm, though. If water started to leak, then it could potentially damage the inner shield. That would need to be patched up immediately. Accidents are never affordable in Antarctica, especially in winter. What Wallman scratched his head over, however, was the cause. Perhaps it was an issue from assembly? Moisture loss can cause hairline cracks, and Antarctica is as dry as it gets. Wallman stood up and put his hand on Jeremy's shoulder. Least he can do is ease the young man. I'll send a report up the chain and we'll get this fixed up. And good job catching that. Great sec. Alright. Striving for something different. As Hillary sat at his desk, his mind resided in another realm. Gazing out over the imagined rugged mountains and snow-filled plains of Antarctica, he felt a deep sense of tranquility, as though he had finally found his home on this scarred and ravished planet. His life had been a good one up until now, all things considered. He had fought in the Pacific Theater from the skies, and following the collapse of the Allied effort, he had since served in various posts in the RNZAF, seeing new and fascinating parts of the world while being lucky enough to stay well away from active combat. However, since he had been invited to Antarctica, his life had changed. Hillary had always been a driven man, one intent on pursuing challenges and doing his part, but never more than that. He had climbed mountains and served his nation, but it took arriving on distant, lonely shores to find the spark to effect the change that he knew this world needed. And so, equipped with his devotion to Christian principles of equity and pacifism, and his affable personality, he had been the odd voice out in McMurdo, never aggressive, but always quietly pushing for more research, instead of the ballooning military presence. The Japanese and Germans could be fought in other ways, further escalating tensions on the frigid waste did nothing to end their tyranny. It was an unforgiving job, but he had to admit that he relished the challenge. Beale, difficult though he could be at times, dealt with most of the matters pertaining to the Commonwealth, so while the Americans armed themselves and the Australians schemed, New Zealand's ranking man could fully dedicate himself to the ideal of a more humanistic, peaceful, daring world. A misfit in a gang of misfits. Alright, apparently some new options are opening up. We can increase scientific cooperation. We are a little low on militarization, but I feel daring. I guess I just did what he wanted. He wanted me to lower the military, and I did, and now I'm also giving him some stuff to do science. Having said that, I don't think our military being, so low is a good thing. In fact, I'm going to send one of my task forces to increase patrol rates to help build up our militarization. Oh no. The tide seems to be turning in favor of the Japanese. For now. I mean, it might turn back. I would hate to think that all of the efforts were in vain, but I guess I can always win the next proxy war. Oops. Alright, the Lobster War ends. Summarize the fascists, I think the Nazis to be precise, and Brazil have been having some sort of kerfuffle over waters to fish in. Alright, and I can also send in some more, task forces. I guess I'll just keep increasing some patrol rates. Project Iceman. There was a rap at Rayborn's open door. Vice Admiral? Rayborn looked up. Ah, Mitch. Come in. Have a seat. Can I offer you some coffee? Mitch Cooper, leader of the electronics and internal navigation system on the Iceman missile project, stepped into Rayborn's office and sat uneasily in the seat across from Rayborn. There's a typo there. Yeah, I'll have some, thank you. As Rayborn poured the coffee, he asked what was on the engineer's mind. Well, Mitch sighed. I know we're not supposed to ask too many questions, sir, but it's becoming very hard to deflect my team members' inquiries about the nature of this project. They're beginning to suspect, and I share this concern, that we won't be able to construct a viable launch vehicle in this information vacuum. It'd help streamline our design process if we were at least told what the missile is to be used for, and who will be operating it. As you well know, rocketry is an exact science. Rayborn handed Mitch a steaming cup of joe and looked pensive as he sat back down. You must understand the nature of this project demands absolute secrecy, and there's much that not even I'm privy to, but I can tell you this. Rayborn licked his lips and framed his words very carefully. The name Project Iceman is a cover name, alluding to the fact that the missile is being developed here at McMurdo. As to where it will be used, I don't know, but you've probably surmised, and you didn't hear this from me, it's a polar launch vehicle. I can tell you the Army Corps of Engineers is intimately involved in the program, but other than that, the specifics are classified. I hope you, the team leads, and the team members understand. I suppose that's better than nothing, sir, Mitch said. Thank you. Oh no, the Japanese are retaking quite a bit of territory. I think the Japanese might win this war. I don't know. Either that or go on forever. Understanding. It was very cold in Vice Admiral Rayborn's office. In fact, all of McMurdo was feeling the Antarctic chill. The command staff had made the decision to reduce heating base-wide so as not to overtax the nuclear reactor. Said reactor had sustained cracks in the containment vessel, which were luckily noticed by Chief Engineer Wallman. Fortunately for the denizens of Antarctica, winter was ebbing, and therefore Rayborn had called a meeting of his command staff to determine next steps. Wright was correct, said Reedy. The winter's been every bit as bad as he'd promised. Given the fact the bays are now thawing, I think we can safely begin recalling our vessels that wintered in Australia. Within the month, I expect to be able to resume submarine patrols in the Indian Ocean and along the littoral of Antarctica. Rayborn nodded and turned to Beale. How are your people? I'm ended just fine, despite reduced heating, said Beale. We were able to maintain the supply lines to some of our forward outposts, but others had to be abandoned for the winter. We could begin reinforcing the extraneous posts next week, but we need vehicles from your quarters. Consider it done. Edmund? I was working with Sir Charles on developing better predictive models for major meteorological events. Hillary smiled. Hopefully we'll never again be put on the back foot by nature's wrath. Rayborn made a few notes and cracked open a bottle of champagne to toast their success and the coming of spring. I think we're finally coming to an understand with this continent, Rayborn chuckled. Alright. I'm gonna check on Antarctica real quick. What a weird sentence that is. I'm gonna do a raid into enemy territory. Patrol to get some intelligence. Close out of the Antarctica menu, and let's read this. Growing light and glimmers of stars. The lengthening of days was imperceptible at first into the mirage of a desert oasis that few really clung to in those deepest of wintry months. However, as the light filled more and more windows and the shadows were short enough to leave patches of melting snow on clear days, it became undeniable that the days were growing longer. It was in these improving conditions that Lois Jones found herself at the top of a hill overlooking McMurdo at dusk, surrounded by a ramshackle collection of scientists, engineers, and particularly curious soldiers. They were in the process of setting up a stargazing night, something one of the more sociable researchers, unsurprisingly a visiting astronomer, had proposed they arrange before the night itself left them in favor of the never-ending daylight of Antarctic summers. Lois, being one of the few scientists to have worked in an observatory, briefly, while still an undergrad at OSU, was put in charge of one of the telescopes. She had to go through quite the ordeal just getting it to stand on the uneven hill, but to her surprise, a couple of the soldiers came over to clear the ground of rocks and place some bags under the telescope's feet. It was interactions like these that gave her hope she might still find a position in the cold insular community McMurdo bred. These sorts of things had been happening more frequently recently, and she recognized one of the soldiers as someone to help her before. Charles, I didn't expect you were the sort to like stargazing. Call it an oddity, ma'am. Well then, he said, looking upwards, it seems like the first stars are peeking through. I guess now's the time to do that gazing. Ladies first. He finished with a cheeky, affable smirk. Peering through the lens, Lois saw the first glint of hope. Here, I'm going to pause it and, I'm going to increase testing network priority. There. Oh. Seems like our side is now retaken ground. Or at least there's sort of a middle to it. I still don't like the general direction this is going. It's Guangdong. Stupid cyberpunk dystopia. Tremors detected in Burgundian soil. Let me turn this down. So, basically to summarize what's going on here, the Burgundians, which are a really insane Nazi-controlled state, like even other Nazis think they're crazy, they've developed nuclear weapons. The Order State Burgundy, run by Heinrich Himmler, a really kooky guy. He's a jerk, suffice to say. I have more task forces I can send out. I'm going to increase some patrols. And I'm also going to stop the Nazis from doing whatever it is they're doing. Oh gosh, the Japanese have retaken like half of Malaysia. That's... Oh no. Come on, guys, I sent the best CIA agents to help you and gave you air supply. Next time I will be more careful not to lose my agents. Next time. Going to construct some Australian outposts. That should help the Aussies out and increase cohesion. And get us some militarization, which we also need. We need better defenses in Antarctica, because you never know who's going to attack you. Into the top of the world. There was more white than Edward had ever seen in a single place. An open sky reigned over an endless sea of snow and ice. A great white carpet rolled past the horizon on one side, mountains and icebergs glistening under the sun. On the other hand, a deep blue ocean surrounded white and gray islands. The landscape was all that Edward could pay attention to as they stumbled out of the plane. They had landed at Thule Air Base in a remote far corner of Greenland. A long gravel airstrip led them to small buildings huddled around the ice. The base was small, but it wasn't quiet. Personnel flooded the area as Edward and the others were shuffled into the camp. They weren't given a tour or received a welcome committee. Instead, they were briskly shuffled through rows of checkpoints and security screenings. Edward stood nervously against suspicious eyes. They were all too similar to the stares cops would give back home. They patted him down and asked him multiple questions. He waited for them to ask for his birth certificate, too. "All right," a bored-looking officer, handing him back his papers. "Next." Edward almost expected to be led to another interrogation, but instead he found himself outside. Rows of buses awaited. Buses with blacked-out windows. What the hell were they requiring so much security for? Infrastructure? Questions spun around Edward's head, but he stayed quiet. He was good at that. It seemed not asking questions would be a good skill here. His eyes finally closed as the buses rolled across the snow. Alright, we have a ton of legitimacy. And our militarization is okay. I'm going to open up the task force menu when the game stops auto-saving. Alright. Diplomatic critical mass. Pfft. Herman Flegger would rather be anywhere else in the world than Antarctica. He hated the cold, he hated the cramped living quarters, and most of all, he hated the white. The blinding, endless, featureless, mind-numbing white expanse that stretched out in all directions. This was a place where people went to lose their minds. Exhibit A, the fact that so many thousands of individuals were fighting over such a worthless ice and rock in the first place. But as long as men fought over Antarctica, Flegger would have a role to play. Today, the role involved briefing Vice Admiral Rayborn on a potential opportunity to change the balance of power at the ends of the Earth. To date, Flegger said to Rayborn, Chile has not felt confident in throwing in with the OFN because they were afraid to antagonize, well, everyone else. But recently a certain, shall we say, diplomatic critical mass has been reached, and in Washington, we feel that the Chileans would be open to certain assurances, even agreements regarding our cooperation in the Antarctic. Rayborn chuckled through Flegger's display of circuitous rhetoric. Brass tacks, Herman? Flegger smiled. Over the next few months, my team and I will approach policymakers in Santiago in contacts within Chile and Antarctica. If all goes to plan, we could see an informal or even formal alliance with our forces on this continent. A collaboration like that could give us the means to expel the competition. Flegger nodded sagely. That's the size of it. Exactly. I'll be spending the summer in warmer climes while you freeze your butts off in McMurdo. Herman, you lucky bastard. Untouched horizons. They swooped downwards while flying towards the fissures in an otherwise unending icy sheet. Lois had poked her head out as they flew over the lonely waters and was now lost in the metallic sheen of the helicopter undulating in the sunlight. This was an aberrant land, and one that seduced only the most daring with its frigid splendor. She was one of those lucky, or perhaps unlucky, enough to be drawn to the cold plain intent on puncturing its heretofore staunch fortress against human intrusion. And so, the pilot descended towards the McMurdo Dry Valleys, the focus of Lois' research. They were a vexing anomaly on the continent, snow and ice-free and completely devoid of any detected life. The former allowed unparalleled access to the towering granite peaks, while the latter made for a haunting work environment. Nevertheless, she was looking forward to settling into the valleys, as her brief time with them last fall had captured her imagination. They were prime grounds for important discoveries to be made, a patch of frozen, uncovered earth ripe for careful research. Further north, snow-draped cliffs and spires seemingly spun from the glass concealed the vast whiteness that led all the way to the South Pole. Those vistas were obscured and eventually disappeared as the helicopter landed, kicking up the ashy gray dust of one of the most extreme deserts on Earth in the process. Stepping out onto the stark landscape, Lewis breathed in a crisp breath of air. Last she was here, she had been ignorant to scientific procedure in the southern wastes and ill-integrated into life at McMurdo. Now she was fully prepared to tackle the mysteries of Antarctic geology, backed by a handful of competent assistants and aides who would cycle through over the course of the summer. A new year dawns, and with it, hope. All right. Italy wins the Italo-Turkish War. That was fast. Alright. Okay, I need to be, going to expand some facilities to help with the, Iceman project. I'm also going to work with Beale. I wonder if there's a way to turn political power into, rather turn legitimacy into power. It doesn't look like it, so instead we're gonna have to send some more guys out to fight, or to conduct jet flyovers and such. Which in turn means we're gonna have to increase patrol rates. Alright. All quiet in Camp Century. The ride to the next stop took 150 miles. 150 miles into the Arctic desert, and Edward slept in an awkward position the entire way. He walked a little funny as they stepped out onto the new camp. The Army told them it was a grand facility dedicated to the advancement of scientific research. All that Edward could see as they approached the area were rows of huts and small buildings, scattered vehicle tracks, and a lot of soldiers. Soldiers with faces as cold as the air around them, who led them through snow trenches and tunnels in the ice. The camp was much larger underground. All led to a tiny conference building near the middle of the camp. Edward stood amongst a mass of other young men, all relieved to be out of the cold. He watched as two officers took to the stage. They introduced themselves as Colonel John C.H. Lee and Major Bennett L. Lewis, and their camp was Camp Century. The two men were the head engineers of the project. The briefing was short and honest, which Edward appreciated. They'd be digging tunnels, and that was about it. It was the most information he'd been given on this job since volunteering. Why did they need the tunnels in the middle of nowhere? Why the security? Edward thought they were good questions, but asking them out loud was a different deal completely. As they planted their shovels into the rough and hard ice, Edward felt a little relief. Felt a little relief. Camp Century was far away, but it seemed it would work the same way home worked. He would be quiet and not get into trouble, quietly surviving. Ma would be getting that money sent her way very soon. And only the howling wind accompanied his thoughts. Nobody said it was easy. The temperatures inside McMurdo's nuclear reactor was cold. So was the mood. While the rest of the Grand Station prided itself in keeping things warm and livable, Wallman had been forced to reduce heating inside the plant facility due to repeated issues with the reactor. He stood against a wall and, in the biggest, thickest jacket he had, while watching his shivering colleagues head out for a break from work. "Hey, Kenneth, why don't you take a smoke break with us?" Wallman jumped at the voice behind him. He whipped his head around to find Jeremy with a sheepish smile on his face. "Jesus Christ," Wallman said, out of breath. "Don't do that again." Jeremy raised his hands as a show of peace, displaying a lighter. The older engineer looked at it as if it were a gun. "Don't worry, I know better than using this inside the building. Come on, the view from Observation Hill is great now that winter is over. Let's take a break." For a brief moment, Wallman felt himself wanting to say yes. Then he thought of the prior months, of how they'd managed to cover the cracks. It had cost them comfort, and it had given them working hours stretching over entire days, and despite it all, he felt like they continued to hop from one emergency to the next. He turned away from Jeremy, almost feeling the young man's smile fall. "Don't bring that lighter in here again," Wallman called out, walking off. Adjusting his glasses, he pictured what he saw in his mirror this morning. A man with unruly hair and baggy red eyes. Nobody said the job was easy. He heard the door close behind Jeremy. Break only lasts a few minutes anyways. So some of my task forces are done, and I have good militarization, so I'm going to be sending some people to conduct jet flyovers and, let's patrol into enemy territory, but we don't want to overdo it, so I'm going to send somebody to, again, increase patrol rates. Alright, the island beyond the ice. The situation, Mr. Lynch, chimed Rip's silken smooth professional CIA voice. "What is it?" "The grip of Germania over the jungles of Madagascar wavers, as does the loyalty of its Reichskommissar." Lynch spoke with a sharp wit befitting his hairline. "Friends of mine in the agency have passed on reports that strongly suggest Emil Maurice's desire to defect to America. This could be it, sir. Our golden opportunity to kick the Nazis down to size." Rip rose, walking over to the window. His eyes consulted the torrents of frigidity, the harsh storm that defined the world. Much like his entire being, in contrast with the elements, an ill-fitting badge glinted on his chest. It was of the MACA-SOG, Military Assistance Command Antarctica Studies and Observations Group. Technically beholden to Antarctic Command, technically limited to Antarctic waters and jurisdiction. All just words, meaningless words. Rip was beholden to a loyalty stronger than anything, which made him and his badge home anywhere in the world. He and the agency had an understanding. American interests did not end where the Indian Ocean ended. Begin Operation Graveyard. The jungles sparkle. And that is where we're going to call it for today. I guess I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.